The second limb of yoga that I'm going over in these 8 limbs of yoga are the Niyamas. Last week I went over the Yamas, the 5 restraints we want to be avoiding, and this week are the things we want to be doing. So the first Niyama is Saucha, or cleanliness. This is one that I feel like I've had a ton of experience with. I used to be very unclean. Like, I'd just make a mess of the house, and I was really comfortable in kind of like a messy space. And now as I get older, I really, really appreciate cleanliness. I was also really turned off to this idea of like purity, like cleanliness is next to godliness. However, in my experience, I've realized that when I can keep my house clean, it's like, and if I have that in my environment, it's a lot easier for me to have a clean mind that's uncluttered. And if my mind is uncluttered, it's easier for me to connect to myself. It's easier for me to be content and happy. It's easier for me to move through my life happy and helpful if my environment is cleaned and if my mind is cleaned. So if I'm ever feeling like I'm just having a hard time, I'll pick one project and I'll clean it. Like, I'll clean out my junk drawer, or I'll go clean my car, or I'll clean the fridge. Something that's like really easy to like end. I won't just like clean up my whole house, because then I end up creating too big of a project. Things feel too messy to me, and then I'm like more annoyed or easier to be frustrated. So I suggest you try that. If you're having a hard time, pick like one simple thing. Maybe it's like a drawer in your bathroom, and just clean it out and notice how you feel. Or like clean your bed sheets and like get in the bed and be like, that feels good. Right, so that cleanliness. I also think of cleanliness when I think about what am I putting in my body, and also what am I putting in my mind. So am I putting anything toxic in my body that's gonna make it harder for me to operate, right? So maybe it's like a lot of meat or a lot of processed food. Or same thing, maybe it's thinking like whatever, we all have our own strain of thoughts that dirty up our minds. So mine is like, I'm not good enough in some way. So I try to recognize when I'm putting that into my mind, or when I'm putting something into my eyes that's gonna clutter up my mind, like commercials or advertisements. Like, I don't need that, especially when it's like saying I should look a certain way or be a certain way. I try to eliminate that from myself, like cleaning the room of my whole organism so it's not dirtied up in that way. However, I think you can go too extreme, right? So sometimes I'll like want to clean so bad that I become rigid in that way. Like cleaning my house, I become rigid, and I feel like that's a disservice to me and my family. Same thing with food. I think it's possible to become too rigid about eating clean, and then I don't think that's any longer beneficial, right? And this cleanliness goes back to the gunas I believe I've talked about, or I talk about often. There's these 3 gunas, these 3 qualities that we all have that we're navigating. So we have Saucha, which is like this angelic or this pure state that we're always trying to move towards. I think about it as the 3 little bears, and Saucha is the just right. That's what we're trying to cultivate. So cleanliness is that moving towards Saucha. Sattvic, this sattvic state. Then we have Rajas, which is like too much, and Tamas, too little. Rajas is like this agitated state. Tamas is like this lethargic state, and we're trying to move towards this sattvic state with Saucha. So that's this idea of cleanliness, is how can we move to this more pure space. So this is one I've been really, really enjoying experimenting with over the years. Okay, next one, Santosha. So Santosha is contentment or satisfaction. I really love this one. We've been talking about this one a lot with my kids lately, of being content with what we have. This goes back to the yamas we were talking about last week, of like not needing to steal, not needing to hoard, not having this attitude of I need more to be happy. Santosha is being content with what we have. Seeing like the good things we have in our life and being content with that, but also being content that we have current struggles in our life, or we have things in our life that we might not want. Being content with that. The more we want the things we want, and the more, I keep trying to say the more I want the things I want, and the more I really don't want the things I don't want, that keeps me in suffering. But if I can accept, like, yeah, I have a lot of really good things in my life that I want right now, but I also have these things in my life that I don't want. Like one of the big things I've been struggling with in quarantine, it's really coming up, my self-doubt. And it's like, I don't like it, I don't want it, but I'm accepting that it's here and I can still be content with it. Like there's this pulsation. I was just telling some of my girlfriends the other day, it's like, we have this pulsation in life. To think that we're always gonna be up here and think life is freaking awesome is unrealistic, and it's setting me up for disappointment. But if I accept like life is a wave, and if I fight that wave, I suffer. But if I can ride the wave, and when I'm down here, if I can remember like, yeah, having a harder time right now, but I know it's not gonna last forever. And if I don't grip onto my suffering, it's gonna be a lot more easy for me. So the way I don't grip, a tool for me to use of not gripping onto my suffering is by being content even when I'm down here. I've been loving this one for the kids because we tend to have a really entertaining life, right? We go to parks, we go to the zoo, they get new toys, they're pretty entertained. So quarantine has been a really cool opportunity for us to like lose that kind of entertainment and being like content to go dig a hole or content to try to start a fire with sticks. I've been really loving that one. And a yoga, I haven't been talking as much about how this applies to yoga poses. So for Saucha in a yoga pose, I normally think about it as like clean alignment, practicing alignment in a clean way so I'm not injuring myself, because then that's a mess I have to clean up later. Or in my yoga practice, noticing what thoughts are coming into my mind, and if the thoughts aren't like helping me have more clarity and a better perspective on myself and my life, trying to eliminate those thoughts, which again are going to come up in a few limbs for pratyahara, which I really love. In our yoga practice, practicing contentment can be like, I will never do lotus. Lotus is not a pose that I think my body would ever be good for my body, and being content with that. Being content when like I'm randomly falling out of tree, or even if it's not random, like being content that like this is how my practice looks today and that's okay. So being content with what is and saying like whatever I have in my life, I want. The good or the positive or what I might call negative, like, I'm okay with that. Contentment, Santosha. I have a friend whose name is Santok. Shout out to you, Santok, if you're watching this. Okay, the next one is Tapas. I'm giving little pauses, so if I have to edit this video because my kids run in, I can more easily. Right now, Violet is taking a bath with shaving cream. That should entertain her for a while, and just playing with Legos, but you never know how long that will last. Okay. Tapas. This was my favorite one when I was starting my yoga practice. So tapas is like self-discipline. Tapas is like grit. Tapas is like the ability to create heat to help burn up the impurities. So when I came to yoga, I was just like, yes, all of the fire, all of the hot practices, like as much heat as I can cultivate. And looking back, I probably didn't need as much heat. So tapas is like this fire. And one of the things I think is interesting is in these spiritual scriptures, the words they've used are really important. So in the Vedas, which are some of the oldest texts, the first word of the first book is Agni, and Agni is fire. So it just shows how important this fire element is. So the fire element, it's like our metabolism. It helps us take things in and integrate, and this continual process of change and transformation. So tapas, for me, looks like having the discipline to practice every day. I feel like that's been like one of the biggest things in my yoga practice, looking back over these like 17 years or whatever, has been like consistency of my practice. And it hasn't been every day for all of those years, but for the past like 2 years, I've practiced every day. And for the past like 7 years, I've practiced probably almost every day. And that doesn't mean it needs to be like a 2-hour practice. I think having consistency, even if it's like 5 minutes a day, is more important than doing a really strenuous exercise or yoga practice, but not as frequently. I like to think of my practice helping me for a time 24 hours. So it helps to like clean out the junk that was accumulated between like my last practice, or if there's junk, I have junk I've been carrying around like my whole life, right? So tapas is this like continuing to turn up to the fire, continuing to help burn away the shit that isn't good for me in my head. So I like to think about this too as like the subconscious habits I'm continuing to do. So again, quarantine has been great to see my habits, to like, I don't want to respond to anger to anyone in my life, but to still see me choosing that response, it's like, oh yeah, Kim, you still have to work through this anger or this passive aggressiveness. So my practice really helps me burn away those samskaras, those paths that I continue to take. And that is due to self-reflection, which is the next one. I really like 40-day practices for cultivating tapas, because 40-day practices require you to have self-discipline, and so you're doing the same practice over and over again. So if you're looking for a way to increase more tapas in your life, maybe try a 40-day practice and choose something realistic. So if you choose something like, I'm going to do an hour-and-a-half practice every day of like primary series A of Ashtanga or whatever it is, that might not be realistic for you. So like maybe it's 3 minutes of breath of fire. Breath of fire is a great one because it's increasing the heat in your body, creating more fire. Something I love about discipline too is that discipline leads to freedom. So again, when I was younger and starting my practice, and I wanted like all the fire, but I really didn't like discipline, right? I was like, I just want to be free. And I don't see how discipline serves me at all. Again, as I'm getting older, I'm realizing the importance of discipline. I remember one of the things that really helped me understand the importance of discipline is to think like, if I had total freedom and like walked down the street naked, right? Because like, who doesn't want to do that? I would be put in jail and I would lose my freedom. So by wearing clothes when I go take the garbage out, because I've heard that's a thing people are no longer doing, or if I pay my taxes, if I do these disciplines that like that I might prefer not to do, it actually gives me more freedom. So that helps me in the mornings when I like don't want to practice. Like this discipline gives me freedom, and that's why I'm choosing to practice. Before, for a while, it was like, I always wanted to have a steady practice, but then I'd always choose not to do it. But the more I've practiced, the more I've realized that the discipline of showing up and practicing gives me so much more in my life. So it's totally worth it, and I want to do it because I see the freedom I get. And that's what really these 8 limbs of yoga are about, is about getting this ultimate freedom, being freed from the in the sober community, we call it like the bondage to self, the bondage to our suffering, being free of that. And that's what samadhi is. And it's not like you get to samadhi and it's like you live with unicorns and you never like have to deal with the shit of life again. It can be like a transitory thing. I think I said that word right, where it's like sometimes you're in it, but then you slip out, but it's this process and it's what you're working towards. And part of working towards that requires discipline. No, you can't really get to samadhi, or maybe you have like a brief second of it, but you can't get to it in a way that like you can sustain it on somewhat of a regular basis if you're not having discipline to do this work. So tapas, discipline. The next one is self-study or reading sacred text. Svadhyaya. I always get it confused with the 7th chakra. Svadhyaya. Self-study. So this is increasing your awareness of yourself. This is reading text to give you knowledge. So one way I like to think of this, especially that's become more and more apparent to me, is that our practice, we're trying to cultivate wisdom. And you know the difference between wisdom and knowledge? So I look back at a lot of my education in like regular fields, but also in my yoga practice, where I was really about wanting more knowledge, but I didn't realize what I was wanting was wisdom. So I read all of the books. I read all of the books. I read all the books multiple times, but I felt like I was like trying to memorize it and just parrot it back, and it never felt really sincere. And now I can see that I was gaining knowledge but not wisdom. So yes, study the scriptures, but that's not enough. There's a great quote, and it says you can stack, you can put holy books, maybe it's stack, you can stack holy books on a donkey, but it doesn't make him wise, because just reading the books, just acquiring the knowledge isn't enough. Then you have to practice it, you have to have an experience of it, and it's through having an experience of the knowledge that it becomes wisdom. So this Svadhyaya is study the books, but also use your tapas and have a practice of it, so it becomes wisdom, it becomes this experience that no one can take away. It becomes yours and not something else that you read. And that is so, so important. So Svadhyaya is having an experience of who you really are. So you begin to learn like that shit that comes into my brain that like dirties it up isn't me, and you're beginning to like be able to decipher. So I think of it too as like a prospector looking for gold. So if I just like if I just take everything that's coming into me and I'm like, this rock is me, this like shit is me, this speck must be me too, this practice of like, this isn't really me, and I'm like having to dissect, like this isn't me, so I'm getting rid of it, so I'm refining to realize like this is really who I am, and this who I am is in everything, and we're all connected. So that's like this process of gaining awareness. What is you, what isn't you, what's serving you, what's not serving you. This also was where like samskaras come up. So samskaras are like this cycle of suffering that we're attaching to. So I often think of it as like I'm trying to climb up to the top of the mountain. And yes, there's a ton of paths to the mountain, and all of our paths can look different. But this process of yoga is this like, I'm really interested in getting to the top of the mountain and learning what route would be best, and learning from what routes didn't work. So a samskara might be a route. I think of it often as like a loop. So like I'm trying to climb up to the top of this mountain, but I keep getting digressed and I keep going to this loop over here. And without self-awareness and self-reflection of like, oh yeah, I'm seeing the same thing I've seen before, and I'm remembering that this path never gets me to the top of the mountain. So I'm recognizing I'm on this path through my self-reflection, through my wisdom, through maybe reading about other people's journeys or the text, and now I'm going to get back up onto this path. Svadhyaya, I love it. Such a good one. One of the ways I've really been liking this recently is reading Japji, which is this poem that Guru Nanak wrote after he had this enlightening experience, and it's written in Gurumukhi. So one of the ways I've been kind of practicing like self-study and studying these texts is I'm trying to learn Gurumukhi, which has been really fascinating. So yes, self-study. I'd love to hear your ways of self-studying. I'd love on all of this if you'd want to share. I love learning from you guys. Okay, so the last one, and the hardest one for me to interpret, but also the most important, right? So the things that we can't put words towards normally is like what's so big and vast about it is what makes it really important, is Isvarapranidaha. Just a second, I think my both kids were in the bath, but now they're out, so they will probably make a visit soon. Okay, Isvarapranidaha. This is surrendering to, often it's called God. And I posted yesterday, when I'm recording this video, yesterday was Earth Day, and I shared this quote that I really love by Frank Lloyd Wright that says, I believe in God, but I spell it in nature. So when we think about God, I know for a lot of people who've been raised around the Christian religion, it's like this guy with a beard in the sky. So if that doesn't work for you and you haven't thought about God in a different way, maybe consider how you think about God. I remember when I got sober about 9 years ago, they say God a lot, and it was like a little bit triggering for me. So I've had a lot of time of rephrasing God in a way that I like. In some yoga schools, they'll think of God as the generating, organizing, and destroying principles. So again, I think a lot about this as nature. Nature pulsates, things are created, things are sustained, things dissolve away. Nature is so much bigger than me. I have no control over the sun rising and the sun setting. So that's one way I can think of God. And if I think about that as God and I'm surrendering to God, it can be like surrendering to not making myself this almighty. Okay, I'll get them down in a second, okay? Will you go put your clothes on? So instead of being like, I am like the biggest thing on this earth, and like, I'm just gonna litter and do whatever I want, and who cares if it hurts nature, that would be a way of not practicing Isvarapranidaha. But if I can try to align with nature and treat nature with respect and put nature ahead of my own needs, which I think this quarantine is doing a great job of doing, is like, how can we like acknowledge the climate crisis, and how can we start all collectively living in a way that respects nature instead of abusing nature? In AA, this was really important too, because we talked a lot about like how my self-will doesn't bring me lasting satisfaction. So what I personally think I want, this is the opposite of Santosha too, like this is what's gonna make me happy in the short run, and if I don't have this, I'm not happy. Acknowledging that like this really doesn't serve me. But if I can like surrender my Kim's will and try to be like, what would a higher power want for me? And how can I turn over my wants and serve something bigger than myself? And this is, yeah, it's hard, right? Like surrendering what my ego wants in this moment and letting myself be content with what I have and trusting. So I think the surrendering and trusting goes hand in hand. Trusting that like I'm doing the right thing and what I need will be provided for me. And that goes back to nature too, because nature is constantly providing for us. But if we think that we have to figure it out and we have to do it all the time, that's just like a surefire way of creating my suffer, is trying to like force things to be the way I want them to be, instead of being like, okay, God or higher power or nature, like help me figure out how I should act, help me put the highest first that isn't me, right? This reminds me of the words namaste and Satnam too. Is this like namaste as I bow to this flame that's inside me, that's inside you, and finding that divine spark in us all and putting that ahead of what I want, right? Oh boy, the kids are fighting. They're not practicing ahimsa. Same with Satnam. Satnam is recognizing that truth that's connected to all of us that aren't the lies, and like remembering that that's our identity and putting that first, that true identity, which is really important and not just seems really important, letting that be at the forefront of our minds. And on Usara Yoga, it's our very first principle, opening up to grace, opening up to something bigger that we can't even conceptualize in our mind. Opening up to those moments of like, aha. It's like looking at a sunrise, you know, like who looks at a sunrise and is like, or a sunset and is like, that's not very impressive, right? Or looking up at the stars and remembering that like we're one small speck in this huge universe. So Isvarapranidaha. This is one I've been practicing a lot recently, of like surrendering what I want, surrendering my preferences, and trying to be present with what is and seeing the beauty there. Okay, so those are the 5.
You shouldn't have, if you're practicing that, then why should you have a shopping list?
If I practice Isvarapranidaha, why do I need a shopping list?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Well, sometimes I'm inspired by a higher power to get something that wasn't on my list. An interesting conversation about this is, especially as you get deeper into this kind of yoga philosophy, and then we get to this non-dual point of view, or this dualistic point of view. I come from a non-dual teaching where it's like this one higher power is in everything. So it's the creator, but it's also in the creation. So we are a part of nature, just like the tree. When you get into this non-dual point of view, it can create this nihilism point of view where then it's just like, well, fuck it, nothing matters. So you do need the shopping list. You do need to remember like the things that you need to do in life are still important. But letting the things you need to do, going to the grocery list, still putting like the highest first. So letting it be this flow of offering instead of like, well, damn it, I need everything on my list. And I'm gonna elbow at people to get it. Okay, so the 5 niyamas are Saucha, so practice cleanliness, practice contentment, have personal discipline, have a self-study practice, and then open it up to something greater than yourself. You are not the biggest thing in the universe, and how can you help co-create with what we have to make a beautiful life for ourselves and for others?
Did my slime out? Did my Play-Doh out? Slime? My Play-Doh.